being implemented, or finance, sales, any of these things. Then this idea of being a trusted advisor, we touched upon a lot of this stuff as part of the conversation. And finally, this idea of failure with consequence. So that means that sometimes we want to protect, particularly our more junior people, from things going wrong. Or potentially some of our best people who are doing great delivery work, actually we're like, oh no, we'll just give them the strong, stable clients that are like the bread and butter. But if you don't have some of these formative experiences, then unfortunately you have to go through some pretty tough stuff to really learn stuff and about crafting and enabling our people to get those experiences. So this one around not just being an observer. So again, I'm not saying here that customer success should sell, but there is a piece, and I think you talked about it, James, a little bit, around how we talk about the value piece, whether it's like looking at what was committed as an outcome and how we're delivering that. For customer success to truly own that and not to have someone maybe more senior or more commercial owning that piece of the narrative. And sometimes it can be a little bit of a tricky one. I remember once earlier in my career, I took over a customer 3 months before they were due to renew. So I was new to the company, and it was really on shaky ground, I would say. And it was a CFO, and I think essentially they hadn't had as much value in the last 12 months that they would have hoped for. And it's really hard because then you have to figure out, do I dwell on that, or how do I pivot to create a forward-looking vision of service based on what they need to achieve? So essentially being pushed in the middle of that stuff, 3 months in, not really knowing, and then having to save the thing, that for me was a really formative experience. And it wasn't about the commercials, it was almost like, how do you change the narrative in front of the key decision maker? And I think we had some goodwill from the CFO who was signing the check, which was good, but goodwill with you haven't done well enough for me, why should I? And sometimes it's great when we can talk about what we did over the last 3 to 5 years. Sometimes if it wasn't good enough, how do we use that as a healthy reset for a relationship that allows us to then rebuild moving forward? And I think having that kind of experience, which does kind of ask you to think on your feet a little bit, can do a lot for creating value delivery. So this one, healthy account does not guarantee a renewal. We've talked about this time and again. You can be the best operator in the world. Another story, this one really bruised me. I had again, personal experience. One of my key customers, key accounts, we had relationships with 13 people in there, everyone happy. They had a suite, it was basically, we had a core product and then we had 3 modules that went with it, and then there was some additional kind of capability build stuff that we were going to sell them. So it was all looking rosy until it wasn't. And what got caught was essentially, I had been so deep in the relationship that I hadn't looked at their quarterly review. This was a pharma company. They had failed a launch for one of their products, which meant that they missed a quarterly earnings forecast. What followed was a fairly brutal chop of budget across. Mostly we were serving support functions, right? So support functions are typically bear the brunt of cost cutting as a first instance. So not only did they not get by the additional capability build that was on the cards, they cut down to just the core module. So that was about £250,000 of annual recurring revenue that dropped like that after it being like the most healthy, happy customer I've had all year. So, but you learn that, and you learn it. I can tell you from then on, I was looking at the quarterly earnings and making sure I was looking at stuff, and not just being head in the relationship. So it's hard, but these kind of things are what help our team to really build that muscle. This one, really, if we can create projects, and it's hard when we're already overworked, right? But if there's an opportunity to, either for ourselves or for a team member, look at a project that we can do internally that provides collaboration with another function, also internal visibility, that really helps to build credibility with people outside of our own team. And that's what you need when you're going to make a call on someone to step in front of a customer. So that's probably, I'd say, one of the easiest, but with a huge caveat that as in customer success, we have more work than we can deal with. So how do you then make space for an additional, maybe it doesn't have to be a long project, but some sort of project that can do that stretch and skill building. And then this piece here, and we talked about that a little bit, which is how do we kind of get to the point where we can lead executive briefings and not just service calls with a kind of key contact. And that's for me where the strategic judgment piece comes in. So not only the ability to interpret what comes from documents and connect the dots with the value that they're being asked to create, but also to read what's kind of the non-verbals in the room. This is the other piece for me. We talked a bit about being a reactive or churn prevention capability, and actually even if we're not actively doing the selling, being accountable for gross revenue retention and net revenue retention, and not just satisfaction or adoption, that really helps to elevate how the business, particularly CFOs, perceive you. I studied economics and finance. I'm not an accountant in any way, shape or form, but I geek out a little bit on SaaS metrics. And there's an American guy called Ben Murray, he's called the SaaS CFO, and he has a wealth of stuff on key SaaS metrics to look for. And essentially, if you're in this category here, the net promoter, you're seen as a cost of service. So what do we want to do with cost of service? We want to minimize it as much as possible to optimize profit margins, right? Whereas if we're seen as a driver of revenue, then in terms of the budgets that we can potentially secure, it really changes the game. Again, it's a real shift in the way that we think about it, and ultimately, to do this and not be the salesperson, that's where this number in particular, the hill I will die on is that sales, whether the team that sells to customers and customer success, should both be gold on net revenue retention, because the foundation of the delivery comes first, and you can't just rush to the top if you don't have a solid foundation in place. And that aligns for the two teams to partner if there are two teams in a company.
Cool. So the next piece is a little bit of conversation on AI. I think like all of you, I'm AI curious. I'm looking at all sorts of stuff, and having my own business now means I have the privilege of not really having someone putting guardrails around what I do, so I'm a bit of a mad scientist with it. I don't have the technical development skills. I'm more at the Claude co-work is my friend, basically. But I still think there are things that we can take out of this. I'd love to hear, again, continue this as a discussion. In the troubleshooter piece, which is probably more of a support component, I would say that this is where AI has made the most progress, because it's compressing the role. So anything that's routine or replies, routing things to the right place, there's a lot of automation that's been happening. Where the challenges happen are obviously if you don't have the right data, if you don't have the systems aligned. So if your base infrastructure is not set up, which for most big businesses it's dysfunctional, so they're trying to build something cool on something dysfunctional, which limits the impact. But it's still probably the place where there's been the most progress in using and deploying AI. What it does mean though is that what's left for the humans is the really tricky edge cases that don't necessarily fit neatly, or they sit between two systems and two teams and are actually much harder. So yes, we've taken away maybe some of the heavy lifting, but in practice, this piece now, the troubleshooters, that's where this technical piece is becoming even more important from a reactive perspective, but probably also from a proactive perspective. So I don't know if that's what you're seeing in your own organizations. Any thoughts?
Yeah. I'd say a lot of the troubleshooting bits, as you said, like the routing, that's been happening for a little while. Not pre-AI, because AI maybe is not as we think of it now, but has been around for a while. Like
yes.
Things like chatbots and stuff that were very basic. Those have been around for a little while now, and those routing tickets and routing through self-help guides, or it may be a very, very basic chatbot. That's been there for a while, but what I've seen more recently is being able to guys when you're looking at like a guide or something similar, so that those chatbots are easier to interact with, but have more information, have more tests as well. So you can ask them proper questions as opposed to FAQs. So that's, but like you said, still those edge cases, and if someone is doing something that isn't out of the box, which most customers are at some point,
yes.
That's where. But that's if someone just wants to do something that's a known thing, that's software or whatever it is you can do, then it's brilliant for that.
And you're absolutely right. I think like automation, I think everyone talks about AI, but a lot of it, when everyone talks about AI, essentially a lot of what they mean is automation.
Yeah.
And to your point, that's been around for quite some time. It's also interesting when you add these, so I have a former client of mine he's like head of chatbot for a Swiss insurance company. He basically rolls out the support. And also, even if it's a basic thing, so they have like, for example, someone who's looking to make an insurance claim and they're basically just had an accident and then they're routed to this chatbot and they're like, they've got garbled noise because they're in the background and the thing just keeps asking them questions on how to get basic information before they're routed to a human. And by the time they get the recordings, they're swearing, they're extremely unhappy. So their ask might be really basic, the human context in which it's being asked, that's not even if your chatbot could potentially solve it, when you start to add all of those weird things in, it gets interesting.
The context as well. I did a post on LinkedIn the other day, which some people may have seen, don't worry if you haven't. But basically I was saying, if you're a farmer and your tractor breaks down on harvest day, you don't want to talk to a chatbot.
God no, exactly that.
We've all dealt with companies that you would.
Yes. That's the thing, we're also customers of businesses who run like this.
Yeah.
So we know how that whole empathy piece, that's where it comes in as well. How does that make you feel, and therefore how does your customer feel if they're being quote unquote subjected to that at the wrong time? So the operator, I think here there's also a lot of progress that's being made because there are now a wealth of solutions that will actually help us to prepare QBRs, pull data from different systems, make sure that we have the right reminders in place. This, again, I think it's a role that's augmented because hopefully we're spending less time twiddling with decks and more time actually thinking about what the impact is that we want to be having. I would say again though, you only know what you know. So it's compressing the work that we used to have to do, but if it's still pulling only from information that is known to us within the system, then you're still going to have that judgment gap with the reality of the customer essentially.
It's giving you the opportunity to become that bit more strategic thinker, but unless you know the right things to query, you're not going to get the right. So it's allowing them to review the processes. So where they find the company process word for word, they might realise it's easier to change it this way or to fine tune it. But again, you need to have that understanding in the first place to get that out.
That's a really interesting one, I think, because that's where you start to see the people who are really comfortable just being busy and following the existing process versus now that we're freeing up time, are you using judgment to go, hang on, we can do this better? Or are you a bit bereft because you've taken away the thing I used to do and I don't quite know what to do next? And that's the people that I'm concerned for when we look at what AI does, is that if you're not able to add that judgment layer to challenge, to think creatively about where you can make improvements with the free capacity that you've got, that's where it's going to be problematic.
I spoke to a head of CS in a financial company a couple of weeks ago, and he's working on real-time QBRs. So he's like, why? Because it's, yes, you've got to predict the right time to go in and see that client.
Yeah.
But they might have a really important internal decision points that you don't know about.
Yes.
So the ability, beyond the dashboards, the dashboard's just a fixed visual.
Yeah.
But giving them the ability to generate their own QBR whenever they want in real time is something that they're trialing, which I'm interested to see how it goes. Because part of me thinks, does that lose the value of your human engagement when you come and present it? Or are you absolutely right? Because there might be a budget renewal that you don't know about, and they can generate an up-to-date QBR because they've just made a change. It's reflected in the service you're providing, and they can generate their own one on the fly. So yeah, it's just an interesting concept of, yeah, that's what they're using it. So instead of just doing a slide deck for their QBRs, it's got to be in their tool as a refresh your QBR now. So you get your QBR still, but you can refresh it, and it'll instantly update it.
So it's not just making improvements to what was there before, it's reinventing, given that you have a new capability and a new tool set that you can. That's really interesting. But in a sense, doesn't that make it even harder for a human? Because you used to be able to prep for that. Now you get something that you have to pull and you have to be able to exert judgment on a dime.
It does, and that's the bit. So I was like, do you lose that human bit when you go in and they value that time with you as well?
So I guess if you just send it, I think that this is, for me personally, that'll be interesting to see how they get on with that, because even if you can send updated data, the human readout of that, where you know the relationship, you know all the unspoken stuff, I think that's one of the things that comes up next actually. It's the one after, but I might go to here actually. It may be the same here, which is speed is not the same as judgment. And also, what about the non-tangible? So the EQ stuff. So the culture of the business that you're working with, or the communication style of the person that's showing up, or actually so-and-so in the company can't stand so-and-so in the company and they're sitting in the same room together. And if you're seen to pander too much to one and not the other, that's going to massively backfire on the, like, all of that stuff doesn't, I don't think AI can do that because it doesn't sit anywhere. It's a read that you have.
I agree fully, because I think human is really important, but it also depends on how plugged in your data is.
Oh yeah.
For example, if it's got every single transcript of every single call, it can begin to get an idea of that more than if it's just seeing your SaaS stats and it's just seeing your contracts. It's got a very strict view on that relationship. But if it can see some jovial comments in your transcripts, for example,
Oh, that's friendly.
then yeah, exactly. Then you can begin to understand that person a little bit more. But I still agree the human is important.
It's not saying, I think there is huge value add, and this goes back to the plumbing, right? If your plumbing is good, garbage in, garbage out, right? If your plumbing is good, you can actually get some genuinely good insights. And then, but it is then the idea of a human being able to take that and just take it to that last mile that makes all the difference. But it does allow you to get much more quickly to something that you would have had to maybe scan through or sense. And it's really interesting how it's shaping and impacting, and it's happening almost real time, I think. If we were having this conversation 3 months from now, we would maybe even be thinking of another completely different use case.
So this, for me, is the one that is really human. I don't think you can get AI to get people.
You might prepare it. I think AI has a key role in giving you, to your point, the context for this, and maybe the way to get to pay attention, or to your point earlier around what's the angle I need to go and speak to that person that I don't really deal with every day. So it's a huge amount of power because it gives us a much quicker time, but the action of doing it and keeping everyone to a North Star, I think that's really where you have the most judgment. And I don't yet see, it may change in the future, but I don't yet see how that role would be replaced.
It's also down to what I spoke about before, with the accountability piece. Ultimately, particularly in our world, I think most of us deal like B2B, you're still always going to want to have someone that's ultimately accountable when you're a contract owner on a client, right?
Yes.
You're never going to get that. You can't argue with it. You can, but you'll lose. It won't listen.
There's
It's
a
not
context
gonna-
window.
Yeah, but it's not, you're not going to have the same argument that you would with a human. And
No.
sometimes, even if the customer is wrong, and we've definitely all been on this, where sometimes you're just like, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, just how do you explain that?
Yes.
Yell at me, or hopefully don't yell at me, but have that moment, and then we'll come back in a day and we'll talk about it.
When you've
properly.
grown up a bit.
Yeah, but we've all been in those conversations as well, right? Where sometimes the customer just needs to do that because something's gone wrong. You've ruined their day, you might have ruined their quarter, something's happened really drastically. I hope not, but
Oh yeah.
and AI is never going to be able to.
Gosh, that reminds me. Early in my career, I think that's when I was in, because they called us implementation consultants at the time. So it was more like the technical, when you were the support and implementation. Is that the old CS, but without the commercial account managers, and it was basically reporting software for pension fund analytics. So they